Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, December 22nd, 2022, and today we have some exciting news from the state of Arizona. A brand new poll. It's exciting in respect to political analysis, at least. I don't think particularly Democrats will find this too exciting. And I say this because we have a poll from Ruben Gallego, a representative from Arizona who has been floating very publicly with the opportunity and the possibility that he would challenge previously a Democrat, Kyrsten Sinema, in the Democratic primary in the 2024 Arizona Senate election. He did a poll in conjunction with Public Policy Polling, a Democratic-leaning organization, but polling nonetheless. Very limited numbers have been released from this state for the 2024 Senate race because it is so early on in its campaign season. But in this poll, we find a three-way race between Kyrsten Sinema, the now independent senator from Arizona, Ruben Gallego as the potential Democratic nominee, and Kari Lake, the former 2022 Republican nominee for governor, who lost against Katie Hobbs as the Republican nominee for Senate. In this matchup, you find that Kyrsten Sinema's favorability rating is just 31%, with 47% of Arizona constituents disapproving of her job as senator. Ruben Gallego is a little bit more increased, a 35% approval, but with just 27% having an unfavorable view of him in this election. Now, this three-way race has shown some very, very fascinating results. We find that amongst the candidates, Ruben Gallego receives 40%, better illustrated here on Wikipedia. I think this would just be better for us to visualize. Ruben Gallego receives 40%, Kari Lake receives 41%, and Kyrsten Sinema receives 13% across the state. So what does this tell you? They have some interesting potential matchups between the two candidates. I think that could also be extremely as important as well. Ruben Gallego against Kari Lake, 48-47. So Ruben Gallego wins in that race by just 1 point, which can be expected, knowing that we've come off from a governor race where Kari Lake, as the Republican, nearly won the governorship against Katie Hobbs. It was a pretty tremendous victory. The Democrats were able to win here, but we cannot deny that Mark Kelly significantly outperformed Katie Hobbs in this race. I mean, what we find in the Arizona Senate race is that Mark Kelly's margin of victory was 5 points when Katie Hobbs was winning by less than 1. So Kari Lake still regards herself and should be regarded as a pretty strong Republican nominee. She still has a chance at winning in future office should the national environment be better, or should the Democratic candidate be worse, or in the case, a spoiler third-party candidate. Against Kyrsten Sinema in a 1-to-1 matchup, Kari Lake wins by just 3 points against Sinema, but in that three-way race, Kari Lake defeats Ruben Gallego by 1 point. In the two-way race against each other, the Democrats retain control of the Senate seat here, but in the three-way race, they lose it. Now, why that is so significant is also because Kari Lake doesn't exactly strike me or practically anybody else as the most electable Republican in this race. In fact, she is electable, but she's by no means the top dog for the Arizona Senate race, and she shouldn't be. I think that she definitely should be left on a bench. She should be called up to action in the event that no Republican wants to run for this race, but given the circumstances, I think there will be better Republicans that could enter into this race, most notably former Governor Doug Ducey, who is still regarded as a very popular governor from the state of Arizona. He even won in 2018 by about 14 points across the state. One in a year, about 12 points worse for Democrats. 2022, Katie Hobbs defeated Kari Lake by just under a point. So looking at this potential list here for 2024, I mean, Doug Ducey very well could run for this, especially with the decreased influence of Donald Trump in the race. Doug Ducey would have every means necessary to run, and honestly, he'd do quite well. There are still considerations that there would be someone like Kelly Ward, Karen Taylor Robson, who would also be quite a good choice. Kari Lake also has said that she's not going to run here, endorsing Mark Lamb, a sheriff from Pinal County in the state of Arizona. But a lot of things can absolutely change, and I think as we will get closer and closer to, if none of these other Republicans decide to run, Kari Lake, who is also holding on to a hope that the Supreme Court of the United States will overturn the governor election in Arizona in her favor, that she might enter into this race. But I think just using her as a baseline, we should treat her as a C-tier Republican. She's not the best, she's not the worst, but she's not going to be the most electable Republican, and yet she's defeating both Kyrsten Sinema and Ruben Gallego in this three-way matchup. And that should honestly scare Democrats. I mean, looking at these numbers, we are seeing an extremely unpopular senator, Kyrsten Sinema, still receiving about 13% of the vote, even when the Democratic majority could be on the line. There are voters here who responded that in a matchup between Kari Lake and Gallego, they would prefer Gallego, but with given the opportunity of Kyrsten Sinema, they would still vote for her. And that is so exceptionally fascinating. I mean, I can imagine that about 50% of this state, based off of past voting history, wants Democrats to be in the majority, or at least would prefer Democrats to be in the majority over the Republicans. But the problem is that it's only attainable with someone like Kyrsten Sinema or Ruben Gallego winning, but they can't both be running. And we can see exactly here why Kyrsten Sinema likely switched to be an independent, because as more and more of these polls come out, the Arizona Democrats are put in a very difficult position. Because the problem is, Kyrsten Sinema has already filed paperwork to run in 2024. She hasn't publicly confirmed that she's going to go for re-election, but Ruben Gallego, who is funding a lot of these polls, has also not publicly said that he's going to be definitively running for Senate. His campaign is still geared around Congress, even though a lot of it has shifted to a more statewide focus and viewpoint from the view of the voter. But just looking at the Democratic primary, I think that Kyrsten Sinema, knowing that in a matchup against Ruben Gallego, she would lose. Looking at the approval rating of Kyrsten Sinema versus Mark Kelly, just look at this list amongst Democrats. Amongst Democrats, her very favorable rating is 6% and somewhat favorable is 10%. Mark Kelly, on the other hand, of those who say very favorable, 66% and somewhat favorable, 20%. So in terms of favorability rating for Mark Kelly amongst Democrats, you're talking 86%. For Kyrsten Sinema, it's 16%, a 70-point drop-off between the two senators who were both elected as Democrats. That's something we also need to remember. And looking at that potential matchup between Ruben Gallego and Kyrsten Sinema, you will find that, hey, wait a second, Kyrsten Sinema is going to lose. Looking at it here, Ruben Gallego receives 74% of the vote, 80% from Democrats, 60% from independents who could otherwise vote in the Democratic primary here. Kyrsten Sinema receives just 13% from Democrats and 23% from independents. So Ruben Gallego practically beats her in every single breakdown, whether that be college-educated voters, non-college educated voters, under 45, 45 plus, female, male, white, Latino, very liberal, somewhat liberal. I mean, if you're looking around, no matter what, Kyrsten Sinema was on track to lose hard. She was on track to be defeated in this primary, and now she is considering, or not considering, but now, if she follows through with the paperwork that she has filed, will be on that ballot no matter what. And Democrats are going to be terrified because it means that the vote will be split. The vote will be split in a way that we see exactly when it comes down to this poll, because it looks as if the Democratic Party's opportunity to win relies on them being the only ones in the race. And it looks like, because so many people do not like Kyrsten Sinema, 19% of respondents are undecided in a race between an election denier and the independent senator who seems to believe that she is a very popular senator from Arizona, even though that is not the case. And I say that because it really just comes out in the way that she approaches handling issues, both home and abroad in Washington, D.C. I think Kyrsten Sinema definitely has come across as someone who, in a way, used to be a Democrat, used to be a progressive, but is now shifting further and further to the right. Not nearly as far right as Tulsi Gabbard. I don't think that comparison is fair. But I do think the comparison is fair that she has left her party, that because it did happen, but that she has also abandoned them in many, many important votes on the filibuster, on gay marriage, and she eventually came around, but in most cases it's just a formality. It really just never mattered, because if the filibuster is there, most of these things aren't passing. But the point being that the Democratic Party, including Kyrsten Sinema's chance at victory, or Democrats relying on a Sinema victory, doesn't even seem to be happening with her as an independent. 19% of people are undecided because she is so unpopular. The Democratic Party has way more than 39% support. 48% is much more realistic, and the thing is that 48% number comes when what many people will view as a quote-unquote real Democrat, as someone that they know, that they trust, that they've seen work within the Democratic Party that won't switch up on them in the way that Kyrsten Sinema has. And given the recent track record of Arizona on the Senate level, on the presidential level, on the governor level, Arizona has now turned into a state that is, quite frankly, quite blue. It is a state that Democrats are going to have to fight for and work hard for, but it's no longer out of reach like it once was for the past few decades. Democrats have completely turned around the state of Arizona. But that doesn't mean Kyrsten Sinema is viewed in that light. That's why she loses by 3 points in this 1-to-1 matchup, whereas a Democrat, Ruben Gallego, wins by 1. But the contingency here is that it must require Kyrsten Sinema to be off the ballot. The pathway to victory is without Kyrsten Sinema being on this ballot, and the problem is she will more than likely be on it. So the question is called in now, and I talked about this in my video about Kyrsten Sinema's party switch. Do Democrats choose not to run anyone? In 2022, the Utah Democratic Party decided to withdraw from the race and not run a candidate for the Senate election, decided to back Republican Evan McConnell, who switched to be an independent, to run against a more conservative Republican, because the risk of having Mike Lee in the Senate for the Utah Democrats was higher, or at least the drawbacks of that were then compared to running their own candidate. Now, it was a different circumstance. Democrats in Utah never win, and they weren't going to win this race, even if they did decide to run someone. But it looks like that might be the case in Arizona as well. Because given that there's over 10% of voters saying they would choose Sinema in this these three-way matchup, should be very terrifying, I think, for Democrats. Because it means there are Democratic voters out there, independents probably, who vote for the Democratic Party because Carrie Lake or other Republicans are not as appealing to them, that think Sinema is their perfect person. There are voters out there that love Kyrsten Sinema. There are Democrats still, 16%, that view Kyrsten Sinema in a favorable manner. That's the joke of it all for the Democratic Party, that it becomes so exceptionally difficult to see how they have a pathway to victory should Kyrsten Sinema run for her election. But what happened in the state of Utah? Well, their strategy was quite effective. Mike Lee, the Republican from the state, won by just 10 points when he won in his last election by 40 points. That's a huge drop-off in support. Evan McConnell, even though he was a Republican, was going to be a pretty conservative vote in the Senate. For voters here, Democrats, alongside with many independents, saw him as this opportunity to push back on the extremism and the right-wing nature of a senator like Mike Lee. Evan McConnell came closer than anybody else could have, and it was only possible with the backing of the Democratic Party. Keep in mind, Utah is a state that Romney won by nearly 50. Trump won by more than 20 twice. So when you think about that, you think about how Democrats have been performing so poorly across the state in the past few elections, the fact that they came within 10 points only because they chose not to run someone and took a more conservative vote over, or tried to take a more conservative vote over an extreme conservative vote, was an effective strategy. The question is, do they think that will be employed in Arizona? And honestly, I don't know. Because I think we've seen also a bunch of takes from some members of the progressive left and also the center left that believe it is important that those who are turncoats are not rewarded with re-election. Because if Kyrsten Sinema doesn't lose this election, she's here to stay. She's going to pull the same exact strategy in Arizona in a way will never be in total and complete Democratic hands. But should we head into 2024, Democrats decide to run someone, know it's going to be a sacrificial lamb type race, lose the race, run in 6 years and reclaim it, maybe that's worth it for them. But in the immediate, I don't know if we're going to take it that way. Because looking at the way that we've been viewing it on the side of a political analysis viewpoint, 2024 is going to be a bloodbath for Democrats, no matter how you cut it. Because it isn't like 2022. 2022 was, quite frankly, a very good map for Democrats. I made this point as soon as we headed into 2022. The Democrats, quite frankly, could not have had a better map to be up this election cycle. The amount of swing states that were up maxed out at 4: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and New Hampshire. And Democrats actually expanded because some of the states on here that went red went to Joe Biden in 2022. But for 2024, it's a whole nother ballgame. Look at this map. Tell me where Democrats have a realistic shot at picking up states. Florida, probably not. Texas, probably not. But beyond that, literally nothing else. On the contrary, Democrats are going to be defending states in a number of them, where Donald Trump won in the 2016 election or won in the 2020 election. Take Montana. Take Ohio. Take West Virginia. You go back to 2016, take Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. These are 6 states that Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, won in the last election, or 7 states, Arizona included. 7 states where he won previously that Democrats are going to be defending. And in the last election, 3 states. 3 states when Democrats have a majority of just one seat, 2 seats, technically, depending on who wins in 2024. But that's a risk Democrats should not be willing to take, because it is very possible that Joe Biden loses the 2024 presidential election. So when you look at West Virginia, you look at Ohio, you look at Montana, in many people's eyes, these are long gone. Sherrod Brown maybe could win in that state, but Jon Tester, Joe Manchin, they're out, because even in a blue wave year like 2018, they only won by 3 points. At least in Ohio, it was 6. And Ohio is the least Republican partisan out of these 3 states. So knowing that, Democrats already come in with very limited opportunities for pickups, and Arizona is going to be one of the high-ranking targets for the GOP. And quite frankly, Democrats might not be able to afford to lose the state. In terms of overall composition, the Republicans have the upper hand going into 2024. We've seen them fail before. 2022, they had the unbelievable, upper hand when it came down to Election Day, and they flopped, right? They did not do well. In 2024, that could happen, but Democrats should not count on it. It can only happen if Republicans have as lackluster nominees as they did this time around, and quite frankly, I don't see that happening. They've learned their lesson, or at least for their sake, I hope so. And I think 2024 will be such an important year for Democrats, especially given that the presidency is on the line as well, and a working Congress is on the line as well. And Democrats will have a very good shot at winning the House in 2024, which means if they can hold on to both chambers, they could get more progress done. Joe Biden goes into 2024 with a very good shot that Democrats are able to reclaim control of Congress and maintain control of the Senate. The question is, how does that happen? And a pathway lies through Arizona. Democrats might not be willing to take the risk at running one of their own at the expense of losing the election altogether, and they might take a page out of the Utah Democrats' storybook and not run a candidate altogether. These new polls tell us that it's going to be an extremely competitive race, but Sinema being in the race does decrease the Democratic Party's chances at victory, and if this poll was to be true, would hand over the Republicans a victory in the Arizona Senate race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate 24 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.